I'm not a fan of group punishment. Like when one person messes up and the entire group of people gets punished and like it's not their fault. But I mean, sure, no one is perfect, but it's unfair for someone to have to pay the price for someone else's mistake. And there are a lot of situations where sometimes someone is punished for someone else's mistake. Maybe with the reason of like, oh, so that y'all can all learn together.
Did you know that I'm pretty sure that group punishment actually used to be like a war crime at one point in time? I don't know if it still is one, but I feel like it used to be like a war crime at one point. You could
War
go to
crime.
jail for like actually like punishing a group of people for like the mistake of one person.
Also, it's a crime. Like it was a crime.
I think so.
It's like in the gray area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But agreed, it's not very nice.
So for whoever who is a fan of group punishment, just comment down why you think it's like good. Like yeah, the
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah, and tell us why. Like we would like why are you a fan of group punishment?
Araceli Vasquez was an imperfect human being, like every one of us. Like, yeah. So she made mistakes and she paid the price for them. But she continues to be punished for something she claims she has no involvement in. But this story isn't just about Araceli. She's an important character in it, but it isn't all about her. So today's case is around 50, yeah, 50 old women who were killed serially in Mexico City within the 8 years between 1998 and 2006. So today's case is about the notorious serial killer who terrorized and shocked Mexico. So today's case is about the Mata Viejitas and just how many people suffered from the consequences for one person's actions. So let's cut to the chase. Hi, I'm Alicia.
I'm Asmita and we're missing Crystal today because she's facing perilous situations right now. No, she's not. She's not. She's fine. We don't know where she is. She has stuff to do. So yeah.
She's here with us in spirit. But anyways, yeah, so together we are Ace Entertainment. Welcome back to our podcast, Cut to the Chase, where we talk about true crime, unsolved mysteries, and generally all things strange and disturbing.
Today's episode features mentions of abuse and murder. Some descriptions may be more graphic than others, so listener discretion is advised.
There was a Netflix documentary that was released sometime last year about this case, and it is gripping. This isn't an endorsement, by the way. It was just a great documentary. And if you haven't watched it yet, watch it. It's cool. Okay, so the Mata Viejitas is Spanish for the little old lady killer. And the thing about this case is that it's complex. It has different layers to it, and different people saw it in different ways. So either way, I don't think anyone viewing this as a third party would be able to understand what was going through the heads of the authorities at that point in time. Because there were four alleged Matavitas, four people were arrested and three people were charged and three people were incarcerated. But many believe, and with good reason, that the original serial killer was Juana Barraza, Samperio. So let's begin with some background on her first. Juana was born on the 27th of December 1957 in the rural outskirts of Hidalgo, Mexico, to father Trinidad Barraza and mother Justa Samperio. They were married, I think, but things got messy when Justa left Trinidad to have an affair with her own stepfather, Refugio Samperio. And this happened, I'm assuming, pretty early in Juana's life because she only knew Refugio as her father. Nothing more is stated about the nature of Justa and Refugio's relationship, but we do know for a fact that Juana and Justa were not close. Firstly, I don't think Juana was ever received a formal education. Most sources state she was illiterate and she couldn't read or write, except the letters in her own name. And the mother and daughter never really spoke to each other. I suppose they didn't have much to say to each other because several sources state that Justa was an alcoholic. And it's unclear when she became an alcoholic because one source said that when Trinidad and Justa were together, she didn't drink. But who knows? The point is, she did eventually become one, and it got pretty bad because the root of Juana's animosity towards her mom was the fact that Justa sold her or exchanged Juana for a couple of beers. Yeah, so she traded like a 12 to 13-year-old daughter for a few beers. That too to a man who was significantly older than her.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just sad. I feel like this does happen quite often, but it's sad that Nan, host Lugo, would go on to abuse her for the next 4 years of her life. So within these 4 years, Juana would get pregnant twice, and both pregnancies would end in miscarriage. Nonetheless, post her mom's death due to cirrhosis, she escapes to Mexico City and goes on to give birth 4 times. Her first 2 children die. Her firstborn died due to some sort of mugging gone wrong. And for her second child, the cause of death is unclear. Her last 2 children are still alive. The father or fathers of the children aren't in the picture. I doubt they ever were, which is why she raised all of her kids by herself as a single mom. Obviously, that wasn't easy. She ran several odd jobs, cleaned houses, even committing some petty theft to just ensure that she could put some food on the table for her kids at the end of the day. So being an illiterate single mother, she didn't have many prospects, but she was wrong. Literally, Juana was a strong woman. And if there was one thing she cared about other than her kids, it was wrestling. So some sources claim that she was a wrestler for a while, and she also sold popcorn at the ring when she wasn't competing. But some sources say she loved the sport for sure. She was like a huge fan, but she never wrestled. So her friends who were actual wrestlers at this one wrestling place she used to frequent said that she was great and all, but she never set foot in the ring. She never competed. So she sort of hung around there with them, kind of like a wannabe. She definitely liked appearing as someone else in a sense, like, because when she hung out with these friends, she'd often treat them for lunch, she'd pay up front with a big wad of cash. And this type of generosity is not something one would expect from a woman like her. So she also loved dressing up. She dyed her hair every month, different color every time, blonde, brown, red, gray. Yeah, just name all the colors. And yes, she was a lovely lady and a trustworthy friend to them. But this type of behavior made no sense. So the case picks up in the late 1990s. And for information, the dates and numbers for this case are really jumbled up. So I'm just going to go with the most average or round figures over here. So from 1998 to 2002, around 9 to 10 senior citizens were murdered within Mexico City. So like on 28th October 2003, Veronica Rizzo gets a call in the afternoon from her mom's number. So Veronica and her mom, Gloria, were super close. So she'd usually be beaming upon getting a call from her mom. But that day was different. Something was just off. So her husband, Roman, nudges her, "Go on, Vero, pick up the phone." So she does. But the voice on the line wasn't her mother's. It was her nephew who told her shakily, "Vero, you need to get over here. Your mom's been strangled to death." Veronica doesn't know how to respond, and her nephew hangs up. So Roman turns to see his wife frozen, the phone still held to her ear. So he asks her, "What's wrong?" And Veronica relays her nephew's message to him, and Roman coaxes his wife into their car to drive to her mom's place. And it was probably the noise that snapped Veronica out of a state of shock. So cops had swarmed the place, sirens were going off, the steady whir of helicopter blades overhead. It was chaos, and this overwhelming feeling of, "I'm going to have to go in there and see my dead mother," hit Veronica. So despite her reluctance, the authorities asked her, to go in and keep an eye out for anything out of place. The inside was grisly. The place had been torn apart. There were markings and labels, cameramen taking pictures of a corpse, her beautiful mother, all blue and bloated with some sort of electronic cable knotted around her neck. So she needed some water after seeing all this. It's like too much to take in. She needed to sit down and take a moment. Yeah, so she walks over to the dining table, and just as she's about to take a seat, the cop's instruction echo in her ears. The glass was not supposed to be at the table. Sure, Gloria may have gotten thirsty, but there was a specific type of glass reserved for guests, and it was out on the table. Veronica immediately summons a cop who backs it as evidence, and that glass would go on to have the prints for whoever killed Gloria. It was probably later in the day when Veronica was summoned to the police station to give her statement, and she recalls that Gloria was applying for her senior benefits ID card. Cousin had mentioned to her that a social worker had come by to help her with the application process, and that was the only stranger that her mother would have interacted with. After the cops had finished asking their questions, Veronica had to ask them about something. Upon entering the police station, Veronica saw this board. It said 2003 right on top, and it was a list of sorts, a numbered list with female names and dates and addresses written next to the names, and Gloria was 6th on that list. Naturally, she asked, why is my mom's name here? And the cop replies, we suspect your mother was a victim of a serial killer. Veronica, now rendered speechless, simply excused herself and went home. The truth of the matter was that Mexican authorities were pretty late to realize that and acknowledge that these murders were the work of a serial killer. Some people couldn't see the connection between the murders since all the victims were pretty much random, and some people didn't want to see it. It was a lot easier to just assume that the murders were separate cases than to consider it that it was like all due to one person who had managed to kill like more than 10 people within 5 years. Mexico City in particular just doesn't have serial killers, is what the deputy district attorney at the point said. And the last serial killer active in the city was Goyo Cardenas in 1942. However, by 2003, no one could deny it anymore, especially because of how frequent the murders had become. And the murders had gone from being years apart to being more mere weeks apart. So when corpses started turning up more often, strangled with the same knot, flags were raised. Soon, district attorney's office was put on the case, and they teamed up with some other people from other departments of the justice and security disciplines to catch the serial killer. Ideally, this should have been a simple task for the DA's office, given that they were well equipped with the help of the best crime scene preservers and reconstructors. But at this point, it was too late. Of course, it was too late for the initial crimes, but more so because in the days that had passed, just assembling this task force, the families of more recent victims had cleaned up their houses and held vigils and funerals for their mothers and grandmothers, and any trace evidence that the killer might have left behind was gone. So now the police did have witness testimonies though, like some neighbors and cousins did see a person entering the victims' houses. But here's the thing, people often think they have a really great memory. It's very common for a person to say, oh, I'm great with faces. When I see a face, I'll never forget it. And to a certain extent, it can be true, but the memory is very easily moldable. So if two neighbors were being questioned, yeah, so like the example would be like, you can remember it's like something, but let's just say somebody like just try to like manipulate your memory, it's very easily
Yeah.
changeable.
Yeah, like I don't know what it is, but like you just instantly want to agree with them, and you start like changing
Yeah.
your story so that it matches their story.
Yeah, so in this case, like if two neighbors were being questioned about the suspect's appearance, initially the two may have different descriptions. Like one may say, oh, yeah, shit, the person had brown hair. The other may say the person had blonde hair. And it's like two really different on the different spectrum. But if this discussion is like progressing together, like at the same time they are being questioned at the same place, they may come to a middle ground and say like, oh, they had just really like dirty dark blonde hair and like yeah, they combined the both together.
Yeah, I know what she.
Yeah. There were some things that the description had in common right from the start. So the perp was tall and big, but big as in strong, kind of jacked. They also agreed that the perp had short hair and was probably in their late 40s. And lastly, most people said that they were in some sort of white uniform. They looked like a nurse, which is why they didn't really think much of it when they saw them loitering around the neighborhood. The cops knew by now that dressing up as a nurse or a social worker or someone who would essentially be of help was the serial killer's ruse. The perfect wolf in sheep's clothing. It was the perfect disguise since the energy in Mexico was very political at that point, with the government launching this special benefit service cut thingy to support the senior citizens. And in any case, the authorities take all the descriptions of the serial killer, average out the features, and make a composite sketch. So first, they ran this composite sketch through their system after narrowing the criteria down to present or ex medical professionals, nurses, and social workers. Yet there were no matches. That's why following this futile search through the system, the cops alert media outlets and released the first composite sketch of the alleged serial killer. Yeah, this was between late December 2003 and early January 2004. So around the 9th of January 2004, quite early in the day, a couple of cops were out patrolling in front of this bank. They're sort of chatting a little, sipping on some coffee, and one of them decides to flick through the newspaper. He notices the composite sketch of the alleged serial killer, and he shakes his head as he turns up to say something to his partner when he sees that the serial killer was walking into the bank in front of them. It takes him a moment, but he's sure of it. That was them. That was the serial killer. And wow. And the resemblance to the sketch was uncanny. Subsequently, the cops followed the person into the bank and arrest them. Her name was Matilda Sanchez. So she was indeed a nurse, but she had no idea that just walking into a bank one morning before work was going to get her in jail.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
The cops detained and questioned Matilda for quite some time, definitely through the course of at least one day. Her co-workers, friends, and families were astonished upon receiving the news. Her manager or supervisor actually went over to the station at which she was being detained, asked the police why they had arrested her. And the cops were all like, what do you mean? We didn't arrest anyone. Obviously, that story didn't hold up for long, with the media running off the story of how two cops caught the serial killer one morning by chance. And the story must have specified how the officer matched the likeness of the composite sketch to a passerby on the street. Since Matilda's friends and family pulled out the sketch to see just how similar it was to her. And the more they looked at it, the more it looked like Matilda, but ultimately they had every confidence that Matilda was not the serial killer. This was just some bizarre coincidence that the cops and media was milking. So her co-workers, particularly other nurses, and they trusted in Matilda, yeah. And they protested till the cops released her. And in the end, the cops did have to let her go truly because there was no evidence against her, and she didn't have any criminal record. Her prints didn't match any of the partials from the crime scenes, and witnesses didn't pick her out of a lineup. So slightly before this event, the Mexican authorities had received a call from French authorities about serial killers and profiling. This was because France had experienced the monster of Montmartre's reign of terror in the 1980s. So Thierry Pauline had murdered around 21 elderly women around this time by following them to their houses, torturing them till they revealed where they kept their valuables and then strangling them. So as you can tell, there were a lot of similarities between the two cases, and both parties thought it would be beneficial to exchange notes and findings. It wasn't easy because serial killing or serial killers, they do vary from culture to culture. And not to mention the obvious language barrier between the two parties. Yet, despite all this disparity, the Mexican authorities did feel as though the cause wasn't a waste of a time for them. So using whatever they had learned from the French experience, from the exchange of the ideas they had, and the witness testimonies, the Mexican authorities profiled that that the serial killer's MO was not much different to any other serial killer's MO. So stripped down to the most rudimentary level, the DA's office and all other supporting forces agreed that most serial killers operate in more or less the same way. So step 1, choose. This is where the serial killer chooses the potential victim, stalks them, categorizes them based on several factors like age, address, whether or not they live alone. Finally, they lock in on one prospective victim. So step 2 is seduce. This is the bit where they insert themselves into the narrative of the victim's life. They visit, talk, share a cup of tea, is essentially going out of their way to understand the victim's patterns, routines, and spaces. And step 3, execute. So which speaks for itself really. The murder weapon for this case always change because they use whatever they find at the victim's house. So on occasion it will be scarves, sometimes it's sashes from ropes, or cords that gather curtains, or even electrical cables and wires. However, since the MO and the signature were pretty telltale, right down from the rules that they would use in the seduction stage up to the knot that they would use to strangle their victims, the cops found it easier to link the murders. By this point in time, the more recent murders linked to the case depicted another emerging trend, which serial killer had begun taking trophies or souvenirs from each of the victims. So there's like something missing from the
Oh my
victims.
God.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, it's like when they take like something from like the victim, right? They do it so that they can like relive the crime.
I've heard this before, but it's just like, it's so creepy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Brother,
It's
My
yeah,
gosh,
it
goosebumps.
is. It's very
What's
it's very
that?
creepy. It's very creepy. No,
What's
I
that,
just
brother?
yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that because we are not going down this hill right
I
now.
know. I know but yeah, all while the task force was trying to form a profile of the killer, media sensationalism had taken over Mexico City due to this case, which is understandable because it's like serial killing and especially since from what I know, Mexico City is like it's not a big place. It's not really a wide area. So it's like a small, dense city, right?
Yeah,
Correct
and
me if I'm
yeah, no,
yeah.
I feel like that's true, honestly. I feel like that's true. I don't know.
Yeah,
People watching this who live in Mexico, please let us know. What is your
yeah,
city like?
yeah. So it's like, from what I know, it's like a small city. And let's just say if you live in a small city and all these killings are going on, you'll be terrified. You'll be
Yeah, because
terrified.
like the killer could literally be like your neighbor. They could literally be living like right next to you and you wouldn't even know.
Like at that point, it was all anyone could talk about. Yeah, and whenever you turn your head, there will be some news about the case and some poster about the notorious serial killer or some chit chat about how the cops were seemingly doing nothing to solve the matter. The serial killings continued and only fueled this craze because the media was eating the story up, and interviewers were out on the streets asking senior citizens if they felt safe, asking young adults whether they felt as though the government was doing something to help, and asking the DA whether their efforts were bearing any fruits. And this craze was due to the culture in Mexico where old women and grandmothers represent the ideal woman, a woman who has lived a fulfilling life by being selfless, a selfless mother also, who prioritizes her family above all else. And the public, everyone was just appalled that a Mexican serial killer would target this specific category of woman and kill them in such an unforgiving, violent manner. Media sensationalism becomes a pretty big theme in this case because with the murders just continuing one after another, the case became pretty high profile when the media started asking some big questions. Around this time, political tension was also pretty high because the governor of Mexico City wanted to run for president. And such prolific crimes occurring within the city and the authorities' little progress to change this was reflecting poorly on his campaign, facing a lot of scrutiny. And I don't want to say just because of the media, because obviously there were other people asking him questions. But this intense political angle just added a lot more depth to this already pretty insane story. And another thing that was brought to light was the disparity between investigations in urban locations like Mexico City compared to the investigations that happen in more rural areas, especially in cases that dealt in crimes towards women. And so many of the cases of missing women or murdered women in the more local areas of Mexico weren't treated with the same level of urgency as the serial killer case. The serial killer was active and killed for around 8 years, during which they claimed the lives of around 50 old women at least. So within those 8 years, allegedly, more than 300 females were murdered in the region of Ciudad Juarez alone, and so many of these cases remain unsolved. And crimes against women all over the country were highlighted when the people involved in those rural cases were questioned or asked for statements regarding their experience with the police. They said that the cops treated those cases very differently compared to how the cops in Mexico City were treating the serial killer case. It was clear to these witnesses and relatives that the cops thought that the victims of the serial killer case were old and vulnerable. Therefore, the police had a duty to avenge them. They asked questions like, did she live alone? Did she have any odd neighbors? Did she have a tendency to get angry? Stuff that's actually relevant, but like for the missing girls or the girls who were killed in the border towns, the questions were along the lines of, where was she last seen? It was the evening, right? What was she wearing? They were judged on very different factors. With this discrepancy being brought into the light, the state attorney's office did receive quite a bit of backlash.
Yeah,
Around
no,
April
it's
1st,
just it's like I hate it when that happens, you know? I hate it when like the victim is always blamed. I feel like it happened with crimes against women, the victim is always blamed a lot more. It's so staggering. And like this was obviously like granted, like this was like several years ago. But the sad thing is that you'd expect it to have stopped today, you know, but it's still relevant. It still happens. And that's it's sad. It's sad because, as you said, they're just judged on very different factors. It's just disrespectful.
around April 1st, 2004, the news runs a news story. The serial killer has been caught, and her name is Araceli. So pictures of her in her disguise holding her white coat and wig were plastered on every news page and screen. Araceli knew she wasn't completely innocent. She accepted she was a robber and burglar who did steal from senior citizens living alone, but she didn't kill them. She tried telling people that she was a criminal, but she wasn't a murderer. And the police didn't want to hear it. It all mattered to them that she had been found, allegedly, with the disguise matching the serial killer's MO, and that among her other possessions, they found government ID cards and, worst of all, stolen goods from the victims of the murders. And different sources claim different things. For example, one source stated that almost 3 months after 75-year-old Margarita Arceres was found strangled with a radio cable, Araceli was arrested on account of being picked out of a lineup. And after which, allegedly, the authorities held her accountable for at least 5 more murders. Allegedly, she was presented and told to answer questions from the media in a certain manner by the authorities when she was taken to media room post her arrest. In the end, she was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the alleged murder of Margarita and 4 counts of robbery. Within a few months of her incarceration, the murders resumed. She's not it. She's not the one.
Yeah. I mean, like obviously, like she's in jail. She's in jail and the murders are still going on.
I think the police just wanted to be like, okay, we found it. We found that. We found her. So stop. So stop this like noise.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like I mean, sure, I feel like they must have been like facing a lot of pressure too, because you know, like the government and the media and you know, like their governors, like you guys are doing nothing, and that's why I'm not gonna be able to, you know, be the president. And they're just like, oh man, he's gonna like he's gonna be so mad at us if he doesn't win. And then, you know, the public as well, they're just like, oh, police aren't doing anything. The police, we can't trust them.
So, a couple of months down the line, around September 12th, 2004, oh, just a little over my birthday. But okay, anyways, that's TMI. But yeah, the cops arrested their latest serial killer, Jorge Mario Tabla Silva. So, allegedly, he had committed 2 murders, but the DA's office believed he was linked to 8 more serial killings. And although there was no conclusive evidence linking him to the murders, the investigation did reveal he had amongst his possessions a blonde wig, a stethoscope, and a Bible, of which aided him in his disguise. It didn't help that he had been a suspect in another homicide investigation in 1998, where the victim had been killed by asphyxiation. So Jorge was always Jorge always insisted that he was innocent, yet he was sentenced to 61 years in prison. Wow, their law is actually, I guess, good, because it's like, okay, it's like good in a way that, like, criminals, if they commit a crime, they
Mhm.
really get their years in prison.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dude.
With this being the third arrest made for this case, the DA's office was being put under the microscope, since people were asking just how many serial killers are there, which was completely valid. But the only explanation the public received was the DA's office and support believed that there were several copycat killers. And murders became more frequent, and department politics also began to give District Attorney Bernardo Batiste some steam when certain opposing parties demand that he be removed from his position due to the lack of action taken. And it made sense for them to claim such a thing, since by 2005, at least 30 murders were suspected to be connected to one sole killer, who was still very clearly on the loose. And the latest theory that the task force had come up with was that the killer is a cross-dresser, more specifically a man who dressed as a woman. There were several witnesses who described the build of the suspect they had seen to be similar to that of a man, with a strong back and large hands. But even the forensics of the murders suggested that an exceptionally strong person was strangling those women to death. So now this theory is relayed down the chain of command to the local cops and police to help them investigate. No one knows exactly why or how when this message took on very different meaning. But allegedly, one morning the cops raided a particular part of the red light district in Mexico City where non-cis sex workers worked. I'm sorry, I know I said that in a very roundabout manner, but I generally do not know the right umbrella term for this situation. And I don't want to get cancelled for saying the wrong thing. So yeah. But essentially, the cops just stormed the place and arrested them, detained them, questioned them for no real reason. And several of them reported that they were beaten, harassed by officers who took their prints and mug shots, despite them being innocent. So in any case, they were let go, since they had no connections to any murder, and more importantly, because the murders continued despite them being detained. And around mid-2004, the serial killer was beginning to get sloppy. So Alejandra Alde was super close to her grandmother, Margarita. They go to the opera, museums, and even to bars and pubs together. And in the bustling city of Mexico, the granddaughter and grandmother only had each other. In 2004, Margarita was already pretty frail, but an injury had caused her to remain at home for the rest of her days. And Alejandra, now grown, was providing for the two of them and couldn't be around to take care of her grandma at all times. Alejandra did ask her grandma if she would be all right with moving someplace closer to her job so that she could pop in around lunch and check in on her, but Margarita refused. This was a home, she would not abandon it, which is why Alejandra would go off to work in the morning, return in the evening, and yet around 3 to 4 p.m., Alejandra would call her grandma at home just to check in, see if she needed anything. This was their little routine, but one day, Margarita didn't answer her granddaughter's afternoon call. And Alejandra is concerned, but she decides to make nothing of it because her grandma could probably be taking a nap after lunch or something. So she just got back to work. Little did she know, just a couple of hours ago, Her neighbors had witnessed something truly strange when they happened to see a stranger in Margarita's house, rifling through her cupboards and drawers. They even had eye contact with this person, and there was something in that moment that felt off to them. But they decided to respect their neighbors' privacies and decided not to pry. When Alejandra returns that evening, she realizes she had forgotten her keys, so she rings the doorbell. No answer. She spams the doorbell, going, "Very funny, Grandma, open up!" But still nothing. It's starting to get dark and the lights in the house are still off. Alejandra begins to get concerned, so she walked over to a neighbor's house, ringing on their doorbell, telling them the situation. Together, she and her neighbors decide to yell for Margarita's attention. Maybe the bell just wasn't working. Still, it's quiet. Eventually, they use a rock and break a window to enter. Upon getting in, they realize that certain rooms of the house have almost been taken apart, clothes thrown everywhere, and drawers and cabinets left open. And finally, in the living room, they find Margarita's corpse, strangled and bleeding. So ultimately, the police are called in, the neighbors relay what they had witnessed, and it was revealed that jewelry and cash had been stolen. The cops informed Alejandra that her grandma was another victim of the serial killer. If I make eye contact with someone and it feels off, I think I wouldn't be able to like sit right. I'll just be like, something's off. Like eerie is like something is not right.
Yeah,
And
that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, okay, it's one thing for like the person to be going through their drawers and like, looking for something, but like if you make eye contact with a person and like the vibes are not vibing, the energy is not giving, would you still like be like, it's none of my business? Especially with like stuff happening around you. It's like at this point, the serial killer has been killing for quite some time.
Yeah, the world is not safe, guys.
Yes, stay safe.
So around late 2004, the DA's task force decided to build an anti-geographical profile, which meant that they will be building a potential comfort zone for a serial killer by marking the points where the murders did not occur. And they took a large map of the capital and began marking the locations of all the murders linked to the case through the years. However, it was very hard to find a comfort zone since the murders were pretty much all over the place already. So what they did manage to find were two other patterns they hypothesized could have helped the serial killer. Firstly, all murders occurred in places that are close to subway stations, which meant that the serial killer always had a quick getaway plan and could have easily gone from one victim's house to another on the other side of town. Their other theory was that since 99% of all murder spots were near parks or gardens, those parks and gardens was where the serial killer used to hunt and seduce their victims. The team tried to build and play out these two theories, but they kept getting stuck, which is why Deputy District Attorney Renato Sales called in Gabriel Regino, the then Undersecretary of Public Scrutiny, to help them make sense of the matter. Upon being shown the annotated map, Gabriel quickly dismisses the park theory. Instead, he draws Renato's attention to another detail, the roads. To my understanding, the geography of cities in the west are pretty different to the geography of the cities in the east. So over here, all roads are curved and turned, but the majority of them, including the streets in residential areas, allow vehicles to pass both ways. But in the west, everything is in boxes, and which is why you have blocks, literally like blocks of buildings with straight streets between them. And pretty often these streets are one way. Only the main roads allow two-way traffic. So Gabriel's theory was that all murder spots were pretty close to the main roads. If the person went the wrong way on the streets to get there, once they hit the crowded and more well-connected main roads, they're gone. Since this theory seemed a lot more plausible, so Gabriel himself passed it along to the cops he found hanging around the DA's office. And he gave them a pep talk and explained that they ought to be on the street so that they could catch the killer. After September 28, 2005, on which two victims had been found murdered, Operation Serpentine goes into action. This operation involved the cops in pairs patrolling the streets near major roads. So they were to cruise along the streets with a siren on, and with the latest composite sketch of the perp in a serpentine manner, winding around all the blocks so that they hit all the streets. The cop would do this every day, non-stop, in shifts, and finally on the 25th of January in 2006, this plan bears some fruit. So Joel Lopez wasn't just Ana Maria's tenant, he was also her close friend. Anyone could tell that the two were really fond of each other. They were like two kids, always goofing around with each other, and Joel would love to pull her leg and prank her, and they'd leave each other little notes like, Joel, I just went to the supermarket. There's some fruit in the kitchen if you want some, or hey Annie, you want to watch a game together tonight? And whenever Joel would come back from work, he would walk through the foyer to go upstairs to his flat, and he would whistle a little tune to let Ana Maria know that he was home. And she would often ask him to come sit with her so they'd talk or they'd watch some TV together. So Ana Maria loved watching news. Though 2004 and 2005 she had been seeing all these women who were her age getting murdered in their homes, she was kind of scared. But Joel reassured her that she'd be fine and that it probably wasn't as bad as it was shown on the media. But on January 25th, 2006, both of them would realize that things were just as bad as they were shown on the news. Joel was a bit late returning home from work that day, and as he turned onto his street, instantly the vibes were off. So nonetheless, he enters the main foyer of the building and notices that the door to Ana Maria's house along with all of her windows were open, which was odd. As usual, he began to slowly stroll towards the stairs while whistling, but there was nothing in response, just this eerie quietness. And something wasn't right. So Ana Maria would always actually acknowledge his return home. So this is kind of like odd, very odd. So he decides to go into a flat using the back door. The hall is empty, like almost too empty. And the first room he passes is her bedroom. It looked like it had been turned upside down and inside out. So the state of the mess inside was appalling. By this point, Hua was already scared to go on, but he forces himself to take a few more slow steps down the hall. When he reaches the TV room, he sees that Ana Maria is lying lifeless on the floor. So the sight sends a shudder through him and he feels as though he's frozen. He can't bring himself to look away when he hears something. So looking forward, he sees that a woman is standing in front of him and they just stare at each other for a minute or two. So soon after, the woman just blinks out of his daze and very calmly turns around and exits through the front door. Bruh, caught in action! It's kind of like interesting how this serial killer, someone catch them in the act, they would want to kill the witness as well, cause
Yeah.
but she just went about her way.
Bro was not here for the side quest. They were there for the main quest. Okay, they did their job. They had no other business being there.
But anyways, so the story continues like this. So officers Jose, Ismael Alvarado, and Marco Antonio Kachik. Yeah, so they were tired. Yeah, these officers were tired, and they were on their end turn. Don't know how end turn about this neighborhood, and their days and hours seemed to melt into one long eternity of just circling this block in their car. When suddenly they see a man run out into the street, and thereafter a woman in a bright red coat saying, "Help! Help! Someone stop her! She hurt my friend!" And the cops decide to go after her, and their pursuit of this woman begins. Eventually, she runs into a narrow alley to reach the subway station, and Officer Marco leaves the car to follow her on foot. They knew that if she managed to reach the station, she'd be gone forever. So just as she's about to get away, Officer Marco catches her, but she puts up a fight, to be honest, and Marco struggles a little because he wasn't expecting that. And Jose catches up just in time and helps Marco to make the arrest. So soon after, the man who had cried for help runs up to them and asks the woman, "What did you do? What have you done to her?" In any case, after getting cuffed and being told to sit in the car, the woman is unnaturally calm. The officers even reported that she just pulled out a sandwich out of her bag and began to eat it on the way to the station. Yeah, the officers had called ahead to notify their superiors that they had made an arrest for this serial killing case. But when they reached the station, everyone was, for lack of a better way to put it, too stunned to speak. Because none of them were expecting a woman in a flashy red coat with super loud makeup and bright blonde hair to be the killer. And the police went through the lady's belongings, saying she had like 2 shopping bags which contained shampoo, hairspray, government ID cards, a phone, a blood pressure monitor, all old coins and chains. She also had one card which had a picture of Saint Lazarus. She also had a lot of receipts and business cards from wrestling rings. So finally, they find a keychain that reads professional wrestler, female wrestling world champion, the Dama del Silencio, Juana Barraza Samperio. So, yeah. So
Wow.
suddenly everything made a lot more sense. Yeah. The forensics team, they had hypothesized that the serial killer was probably a wrestler or someone who practiced wrestling because the way the headlock was applied. But once again, everyone just sort of expected it to be a man, especially because of how violent some of the crimes were, which isn't common amongst female serial killers. Eventually, the cops took her prints and ran them through the system, and Juana's prints matched at least 10, if not more, of the prints and partials found at the several different crime scenes. Thus began the questioning.
The prejudice, they really thought that this was gonna be a man, huh? They really thought, like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I know that I should not be picking this apart for that, but like, still, that's all I had to say. I just know that if Crystal was here today, she would be having an absolute fit over this. She would be going off, you know. So I had to like deliver that bit for her.
Yeah, like woman kill too. I don't know
Yeah.
whether to be proud of this, but yeah.
No, I mean, like, okay, I wouldn't say it's something that necessarily we have to be proud of, but I just feel like, you know, sure, I'm sure that like whenever like people profile certain things, I'm sure that like they do it because of their training and whatever knowledge they have, right? And
Mhm.
that's completely fair and valid. But I'm just saying that for a lot of the cases that we've seen so far, um, I mean, I just feel as though like, people hardly ever expect it to be a woman. Like
Yeah.
they hardly like it's not even something that they take into consideration, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure. Maybe there was a person, you know, uh who was involved over here was just like maybe it's a woman and they were just like and all the other cops were just like, okay, good one, Brenda. Have a donut over that. But like I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there was someone who considered that and they just got shot down. But yeah, the way it appears right now is that like it wasn't even considered.
Okay, so this was a long ride for everyone involved, as simply because Juana kept changing her story. So initially, she claimed she hadn't killed anyone, and then she claimed she only killed Anna Maria, because obviously someone caught her in the act.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the reason that she gave was she got into a disagreement with her over her wages, and which somehow made her angry enough to murder her. So then, with a bit more prodding, she revealed that she had been mistreated by her mother as a child, which is why she hated all the women around her mother's age. So some trauma. But yeah,
Mm,
within the next few
PTSD.
days, her home and the wrestling ring she used to frequent are inspected. Well, another team stays with her to try and extract a confession from her. So her house was a mess. It was filthy and it was hard to find an empty space to step on because there was literally stuff everywhere. And right upon entering her house, you could see an altar for Santa Muerte. And in her living room, she had a giant framed poster of herself in her wrestling costume as La Dama del Silencio. And her neighbors, upon being questioned, said that they didn't know much about her and she was kind of a recluse. Yeah. So they also mentioned that she had moved in pretty recently and they surmised that she wasn't going to stay there for long. And her mates at the wrestling ring was shocked when they received the news. They would have never thought that their kind friend would have done such a thing. And some people said that she did used to wrestle, but she had gotten injured, which is why she had to quit. If that was true, then the cops guessed that having to quit wrestling was probably what drove her to murder, since wrestling was her outlet, which had been taken away from her. And meanwhile, back where Juana was being detained, the officers couldn't get a confession from her. But she did show them how she tied the signature knot to kill people and how she would subdue her victims should they attempt to fight back. She literally demonstrated it on an official, and who said later on that she must have gotten a bit carried away because at one point she squeezed too hard and he couldn't breathe.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
oh my gosh. So her trial didn't start till spring of 2008 when she was charged with 40 murders. Oh my gosh. And on 31st of March 2008, she was sentenced to 759 years in prison
What?
for 16 charges of murder and aggravated burglary and 11 separate counts of murder. So the victims' names were being read out for her sentence, and Juana actually interrupted several times to say something along the lines of, go ahead, just throw a couple of names there and just blame it all on the scapegoat. Veronica, Alejandra, and Joel all had a chance to speak with her on the day of her hearing. So Veronica simply told her that she hoped that God could forgive her. And with Alejandra, all she could bring herself to say was that he took my grandma away from me. And to which Juana only replied, yeah, but you were the one who left her all alone in the first place. Alejandra was mortified. She actually had to leave the courthouse because she felt sick after that interaction. And finally, when Juana saw Joel, she said, you know what God protects me? To which Joel replied, no, which God? Juana holds up a card with a picture of Santa Muerte and tells him she does, and I'll be fine because she's looking out for me. So sure, good for you. Just know that you haven't hurt me. You've hurt your children the most. And after hearing that, Juana just turned around and left. So Juana is serving her sentence at the Santa Marta de Acatitla prison in Mexico. So she sells tacos on Tuesdays as a reward for her good behavior, allowing her to have a source of income while being incarcerated. She also got married in 2015 but soon got a divorce. Wow, girl is still living a life after killing 40 people. And she's also kind of a star in jail, like the other people there, and they're sort of afraid of her because, yeah, she's scary. So they treat her well to stay in her good books. Speaking of which, Araceli is also serving her sentence in this prison, despite it being known now that she didn't murder anyone. So her sentence has not been reduced, and she continues to say that she's innocent and she's being punished for something that she didn't do. And Jorge Mario was also adamant on that he was innocent right up to the day he died. And sources state that Araceli and Juana have become acquainted in prison. But that is the extent of their relations with each other. Two cops who made the arrest, officers Jose and Marco, were rewarded for their excellent service with a medal and an award. And they also received a cash prize of 100,000 pesos each and an apartment.
Wow.
And wow, that's like a big prize.
Mhm.
Slay.
Slade.
So Hoa also received an award for aiding in the capture of the serial killer, but he doesn't feel as though as he's worthy of such a prize. 'Cause at the end of the day, he believes that he couldn't save Ana Maria's life, which is why he feels like he doesn't deserve any reward. But yeah, that's it for this case. What do you guys think?
I think that something ought to be done, something ought to be done for the accused who were like, not really, something needs to be done for them. I don't know how that's gonna work. I don't know if people can just like once they realize that like, oh, this person has not really killed 5 people, but we're still like punishing them because we thought at one point in time that they killed 5 people. Like, I don't know what the process would be to reverse that.
Mhm.
I don't even know if such a process exists, to be honest. But yeah, like if it doesn't, it should. Because I can get that mistakes can happen. I can get that, like, at that point, it was probably a really stressful time for everyone who was working this case, and they just needed to like push and show results anyhow, which once again, that's understandable, but like you should also like have like, I don't know, the dignity to like acknowledge that like a mistake has been made and that she's probably being punished for way too long for something that she didn't actually do. So yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
that's that's really all I think, because at the end of the day they did manage to catch, the original serial killer, right? I'm assuming that after Juana was caught, like the serial killing stopped. That's like the biggest, sign that like the
Yeah.
actual one was caught, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's true.
So she was sentenced to like all those years in prison for like 16 plus 11 charges, right? Which is, I don't know, it's like 30 something, I imagine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, like, what about, first off, what about the rest of those? What about, because I know that like more elderly women were killed. So, what about the rest? And what closure to those families in particular, who allegedly like weren't tied to this case because she wasn't sentenced to jail for those murders as well. Like, what
Mhm.
closure did they get?
So we've come to the closing of this episode. Innocent until proven guilty. That's usually the textbook phrase that people turn to when they think about justice. However, many people think that this logic did not apply to several aspects of this case. So, like, yeah, just now what we've mentioned is that it feels like justice is not really served to the victims.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And as I was saying, like, sure, like in the end, the authorities did manage to catch the real serial killer, but at that point, like, so much damage had already been done. And I mean, not just RSLE, there are so many people still paying the price, you know?
So has justice really been served? Or must amends be made? Let us know what you think, or if you missed out on anything in the comments. We'd love to hear from you guys, and as always, us rookies would be super grateful for any feedback or constructive criticism you'd have for us.
Um, all our source material will be linked in the description, and not gonna lie, I am gonna go and watch that documentary you were talking about.
That will be all for today's episode. We hope it was thrilling or spooky, or at the very least, we hope you learned something new. We'll be back on Friday, so stay tuned. Yours truly, this was Ace Entertainment signing off. Until next time, bye.
Good night.
Good morning.
Have a good one. Stay safe.